76 Russian aviation strikes, 794 drone attacks. Just a normal night for firefighters and emergency services across Ukraine. The two separate agreements the US has forged with Kyiv and Moscow are unlikely to bring any immediate let-up. At best, today may mark a tentative first step towards a temporary truce. The agreements say Ukraine and Russia will develop measures to ban strikes against energy facilities.
There are a million questions. I honestly think so. There will be millions of questions and details. But as of today, it sounds like this. Neither side will use weapons against the energy system of the other.
The documents were the result of negotiations in Riyadh earlier this week. Russia was pouring cold water on the agreements in advance.
We will need clear guarantees, and there may be guarantees taking into account the sad experience of agreements with Kyiv. Guarantees may be the only result of a direct order from Washington to Zelensky and his team to do this and not any other way.
The Ukrainian port of Odessa. The agreements require both countries to refrain from attacking each other's commercial shipping in the Black Sea, which would benefit Russia, as Ukraine has maritime supremacy. Although Ukraine controls Odessa, Russia strikes the city daily. Russia has the Crimean port of Sevastopol, but Ukrainian attacks forced it to withdraw its Black Sea fleet to Novorossiysk. Ukraine exports grain across the Black Sea through the Bosphorus to Turkey and beyond. According to today's agreement, Russia would now be allowed to export fertilizer and other agricultural goods across the sea. The Kremlin is trying to use the agreement to get some sanctions lifted, including those on the international currency exchange system SWIFT. But that's not in the gift of President Trump. The Ukraine-US document includes a clause about prisoner of war exchange, like the one last week. Ukraine also wants the return of children forcibly transferred to Russia. So many military funerals in Ukraine and in Russia too. So little trust between enemies. What we have today is a limited partial maritime truce and maybe a curb on some air attacks. It's far from the enduring peace President Trump said would be so easy to achieve.
Lindsay Hilson reporting there. Well, I'm now joined by Oleksandr Mereshko, a Ukrainian member of parliament and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of that parliament. Thanks very much for coming back on the programme, Oleksandr. I mean, this is a complicated deal and there are lots of ifs and buts, but what's in it for Ukraine? Well, how does it benefit Ukraine?
Well, trying to find a silver lining in this cloud, I would say that the most important thing is, first of all, about exchange of prisoners of war and about its kind of hope. I don't know whether it will be realistic hope or not, about Russia stopping to destroy, to bomb our critical civilian infrastructure, including energy infrastructure.
Right, and that's the plan. But the Russians have attached various conditions to this, including the lifting, the introduction of the one or two Russian banks into the SWIFT system. Now, this is not up to the United States. It's up to Belgium, if I'm not mistaken. Have you spoken to the Belgians? Do we know if the Belgians are on board?
As far as I know, we haven't spoken yet to our allies and partners in Belgium. But, this, first of all, it's very typical for Russians. They never say yes without any reservations. They usually attach very often unacceptable conditions, additional conditions. It's very typical for them. Additionally, it might create very dangerous precedent of weakening sanctions against Russia. Russians, Putin, they know what they're doing, and it's a kind of, I would call it even provocation on their part.
Is part of the problem here that you're not all sitting around the table together? Because if you were in the same room at the same time, which of course the Americans have ruled out, you might, put up your hand and say, we don't like this part of the deal. And the Europeans might say, actually, we're the ones who decide on some of these sanctions, including SWIFT. But that's not happened. And is that the problem here? Parallel negotiations?
Well, It is a problem, but I don't think that it will change drastically the whole situation for a very simple reason, because Russians, they have proved many times consistently that they cannot be trusted. They have violated all possible agreements, all possible ceasefires under the Minsk Accords, for example. There were 25 at least ceasefires. Each of them has been violated by Russia. That's why it doesn't change much, the whole situation. It's not a problem in which form we discuss this issue. The problem is that Putin is not going to abide by any agreement in good faith.
But can you be trusted to carry on not shooting at their targets if they don't comply with the ceasefire because some of the sanctions haven't been lifted?
Of course, we can be trusted, and we have each time I was involved in negotiations under Minsk Accords, and we have been doing every effort to abide by agreements reached for a very simple reason, because it's in our interest. It's in the interest of saving lives of our people.
So is the idea here that, let's say these sanctions are not lifted and Russia carries on, attacking targets on the Ukrainian side in the Black Sea, that you can then turn around and say, we can't trust the Russians. You kind of shame them, into their position, and then you hope that the Americans intervene. Is that the plan?
Well, in this particular situation, what we have right now, the United States is trying to play the role of a sort of guarantor. And of course, if Russians violate the conditions, the provisions of this agreement, we have no choice but to turn to the United States and to ask them for sanctions or for any ways to put pressure on Russia and to make them to observe these agreements, if it is realistic, of course.
And is that the point here, that you were basically forced to sign this by the United States because they gave you no other options if you want to carry on receiving support from Washington?
The thing is that we're trying to demonstrate to our biggest ally, biggest friend, which is the United States, that we stand firmly for peace. There shouldn't be any doubts about this. We're interested in peace, and we're committed to peace, but we are for just peace based on international law. We're not for appeasement of the aggressor.
Okay, going to leave it there. Sounds like we have to wait a little bit longer for peace. Alexander Mereshko, thank you very much indeed.